Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, you know, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
What's going on, everybody? It's the Scene Snob, Mick Manhattan, and I'm here to tell you guys about thescenesnobs.com. We're a channel of variety, comedy, entertainment, geek-related, sports, the whole nine yards. We cover almost every genre. And we have so many great shows to choose from. We have shows like the Scene Snobs Podcast, BTB Podcast, The Guapo Show, the Sports Snobs Podcast, the PVD Cast, Jeff Dwoskin presents Crossing the Streams, the Three Geeks Podcast, the Fandom Effect. We probably have the only Matlock-based podcast called Matt Talk, and we're introducing new shows all the time. We have new shows coming up like the Ear Hustling Podcast, Carpool Shenanigans, and of course, from some nobodies, Twitching Upstream and Talking Upstream. So come on, check out thescenesnobs.com, enjoy it, and please leave feedback. Like, follow, subscribe us, and just let us know what you think. We love to have all the interaction. So I, again, am the Scene Snob, Mick Manhattan. Check out thescenesnobs.com. You can follow us anywhere on social media at The Scene Snob, and we will talk to you guys soon. Take care.
Welcome to the Scene Snob interviews with your host, Mick Manhattan. Please like and subscribe to our channel and follow us at The Scene Snob.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Scene Snobs interviews. I am Mick Manhattan, the Scene Snob, of course, and I am joined today by filmmaker Chris Bournea. He is here to talk about his new movie, Lady Wrestler, the amazing untold story of African-American women in the ring, and it will be available on Amazon Prime as of February 16th, 2021. Or you can go to the website, which is down in the description, and you can go and pick it up now. There's something about the world of wrestling for me that I love to learn more and more about the vintage world of wrestling.
Yeah, especially because they didn't have the advanced training equipment and the chemical. I'm not saying all modern day wrestlers use chemical supplements, but that's something that one of the women I interviewed, Ethel Johnson, talks about is that all the training you did, it was your own body weight. It wasn't, you weren't being assisted by a machine, or chemical supplements. It was all hard labor to develop your body.
Well, during this, how much did you know about wrestling? Were you a wrestling fan before you got into doing the movie?
Yeah, so I was a wrestling fan when I was in middle school. I grew up in the 80s, and so I used to watch WTBS. I used to watch the I forget the name of the WWF before it was WWE on WTBS. So I was into Roddy Piper, whom I got to interview, Hulk Hogan, that Ric Flair, that whole I guess you would call them class of wrestlers. Yeah. But I kind of outgrew it as I got into high school. So by the time I started working on Lady Wrestler, I hadn't thought about wrestling for years and years. It was the furthest thing from my mind. But what happened was, so most of my career has been in print journalism. So I was working at a newspaper here in Columbus, Ohio called This Week News, which is a subsidiary of the Columbus Dispatch, which is the local daily newspaper. And so there was this man named Terry Anderson, another African-American man like me, who worked as a publicist for the Greater Columbus Arts Council. So I would periodically call him for story ideas. And he kept saying, Chris, there's this really interesting woman that you should interview. I grew up in her neighborhood. She was some kind of wrestler or bodybuilder, and she has really interesting stories. So that ended up being Ethel Johnson, which was one of the first African-American superstars of wrestling back in the 1950s. So Terry set up this interview for us. This was, believe it or not, the end of December 2005. It was that long ago. So Ethel had all these amazing stories of going all over the world. She was a teenager at the time, wrestling in Japan and Canada, Latin America, Australia. And then when she would travel in the Deep South, she would, because of segregation, she'd have to go in the back door of restaurants. You'd have to stay at a rooming house instead of a regular hotel because of, blacks weren't allowed to stay in the hotel in the area. And she just had all these amazing stories. So I wrote it for the Columbus Dispatch, and the Dispatch published it in March of 2006 for Women's History Month. And it just happened to be the weekend that Arnold Schwarzenegger holds his annual fitness festival in Columbus. And Arnold Schwarzenegger saw the article and had his people call me at the newspaper. And they told me, they said, we want to give Ethel Johnson a Lifetime Achievement Award. We think she's an amazing person. And so I called Ethel's daughter, Shelley Adams, who I later found out was originally the one who was trying to get awareness to her mother's story so that her mother's story wouldn't just fade into obscurity. So I told Shelley that Arnold Schwarzenegger wanted to honor her mother. And I could tell by the tone of Shelley's voice that Ethel wouldn't be that excited about it, because by this time Ethel was retired and she was a grandmother and just wasn't into the spotlight. So sure enough, Shelley called me back and said, Mom said, tell them I said thanks, but no thanks. So she turned down a Lifetime Achievement Award from Arnold Schwarzenegger. So I thought, if someone like Arnold, who is not only an international superstar, but a fitness guru, and by the way, he got one of his first bodybuilding titles in Columbus, Mr. Universe. That's why he has his fitness festival in Columbus every year. So I thought, if someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger can see the merit in Ethel Johnson's story, then there's more to it than just one single newspaper article. And in the process of researching Ethel's story, I came across this documentary called Lipstick and Dynamite about women from Ethel's era, other female wrestlers, but they didn't feature any of the black women. And I don't think that was like an intentional exclusion. It was just the filmmaker who made that movie just focused on the women she had access to. So I thought, there's this whole other chapter of wrestling history and of black history and of women's history and sports history that hasn't been explored, and that it's the contributions these black women made to the sport way back before before the civil rights movement really took effect. And I just thought their story was interesting. And I came to find out there were dozens of women like Ethel, including her older sister, Babs, who was actually the first one to go into women's wrestling before Ethel did, and then her younger sister, Marva. And unfortunately, Babs and Marva had both passed away by the time I interviewed Ethel, so I wasn't able to interview them. But I did interview Ethel, and I interviewed a family friend who was also a black female wrestler named Ramona Isbell.
Oh, so with that, then, like, how far back? So her family, like you said, her sisters were both wrestlers.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah. So how they got into wrestling was, there was this promoter, a white man named Billy Wolf, who was a kind of a failed wrestler from Missouri. And for some reason, I never found out the exact reason, he settled in Columbus, Ohio, my hometown, and where a lot of these black women wrestlers live, or where he discovered a lot of these women wrestlers. So Billy Wolf groomed his first wife, a white woman named Mildred Burke, into the very first women's world wrestling champion, Mildred Burke. For some reason, he found her like working as a waitress at some diner and just decided she could become a world-class wrestler. And so he knew that Mildred needed competitors, because it's not like there were women wrestlers just like walking around every street in America. He would have to groom them himself. So for lack of a better word, he created this stable of women's wrestlers to compete with each other. And Billy Wolf had this very shady reputation. He was kind of known as being kind of like underhanded, and sometimes would cheat the women out of their pay and just being kind of shady. But he was progressive when it came to race relations, and he was inspired by Jackie Robinson. And he thought, if I can do for wrestling what Jackie Robinson did for Major League Baseball, but by bringing black women in, people will come see wrestling matches just out of sheer curiosity to see like black women and white women wrestling each other. And Babs and Mildred Burke, Ethel's older sister Babs, was actually in the first interracial championship with Mildred Burke. So Babs sort of recruited Ethel. Well, Billy recruited Babs, Babs recruited Ethel, then their youngest sister Marva kind of got into the business. And there was also another woman named Kathleen Wembley, who was one of the first black female wrestlers, who I did not get to interview, but she's actually still living. Ethel passed away in September of 2018. But she was just really, really easy to talk to, very forthcoming, just had a lot of amazing stories, both stories about the good times traveling all over the world, and stories about the bad times dealing with racism and sexism and really scary situations.
Yeah, I mean, for a long time too, that the wrestling world was always had this connotation on women, sexism, I should say, on racism, just how people of color are portrayed, women are portrayed. It was, it was a white man's sport for so long, even well into way past when it should have been.
Yeah. Well, the thing with Billy Wolf is that he and Mildred Burke created this formula. And I got this information from Jeff Lean, a Washington Post reporter who wrote a biography of Mildred Burke. So Billy Wolf and Mildred Burke created this formula called Sex, Muscles, and Diamonds that all of the female wrestlers that they worked with had to kind of adhere to. So sex was, you had to be a good-looking, sexy woman. Muscles was you had to be a true athlete. You had to know all the holds. You had to be like a gymnast where you could, roll and fall and flip and do all the things without hurting yourself. And diamonds was you had to be glamorous. You had to look like a movie star, a movie Hollywood starlet outside of the ring. He didn't allow the women to wear pants or smoke cigarettes or use profanity. You had to be quote unquote ladylike outside the ring because Billy knew a lot of the fans were men, and he wanted to keep that sex appeal, but also have the women be real athletes.
It's definitely interesting. Well, I want to say I misspoke before when I said way past when it should have been, because it never should have been. It's just there is that most companies at that time were like the 90s were like pushing progressive, and it seemed like wrestling was kind of going backwards in a long way towards the 90s and the early 2000s. And it wasn't until very recently do we see even women's wrestling is actually dominating because they are more athletic than the men seem to be.
Yeah, and Ethel and Ramona Isbell, the other wrestling legend that I got to interview, talk about that. About at the time we did the interview, which was the mid 2000s, they talked about how they didn't even watch wrestling anymore because they felt like women's wrestling was nothing but like a strip tease, basically, and that it was all about, excuse my French, TNA, and it wasn't about real athleticism the way it was when they were in the business. And so I think in recent years, yes, women are making more progress. But so what happened was Billy Wolf died in the mid 60s. So after Billy Wolf died, that whole Sex, Muscles, and Diamonds formula kind of went by the wayside, and it became more about sensationalism and, not so much about athleticism. It was more about putting on a show and having the women basically be like, have the women be like sex symbols, but not necessarily the like top tier wrestlers in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Well, one question I'd love to ask is, and I know I'm going to see this in the documentary, so I don't want to give too much of anything away, but you did say you got to talk to Roddy Piper, who started out like really right before the sensationalism really started. It seemed like he started, so did he have any good input on that change and what kind of went down and how that worked?
Yeah, I didn't ask him so much about the change in the industry, but he actually remembered Ramona. He had worked with Ramona. They had like done a match together or were on a card together or something in Montreal. And he talked about how he was very, very honest. He was just like, the wrestling industry looks at women as flash. They don't look at them as like the main attraction. And he was like, women have to work harder to be recognized for half the work that men do. It not just in the wrestling industry, but in society in general. But he said women really are not given the credit that they're due. And Ramona actually told us, this is not in the documentary, but at one of the screenings we had, Ramona talked about how she was in Montreal at some bar or something with Roddy Piper after their match. And not a lot of people know he was Canadian, so he was bilingual. He spoke French and English. And so there was some man hitting on Ramona in French. And of course she could handle herself being a wrestler, but the man was just being really obnoxious, and she didn't even know what he was saying because, she doesn't speak French. So Roddy Piper kind of stood up for her and said, hey, leave her alone or I'm going to, tear your face off or whatever. So a lot of the male wrestlers befriended the women and were kind of, you wouldn't expect them necessarily to be gentlemen outside of the ring, but they were. The women talk about that.
Oh, that's good to hear, at least,
Yeah.
especially with like how we were talking about the industry. So with Ethel, how long did she wrestle for? What was her span?
Yeah, so she started in the like early 50s when she talks about she started training when she was in middle school. So she was like 12.
Oh,
And so she wrestled from like the early 50s up through, I want to say like the late 70s. So it was a good over 20 years. And Mildred Burke, the first women's champion, she was champion from like the 30s through the 50s. So a lot of the women that, they call it the golden age of wrestling, a lot of these women were in for years and years and years. And, a lot of them, it wasn't like toward the end of their career, it wasn't full time. They were like, they'd go on to like second careers, or like with Ethel, she became a full-time mother eventually. And sometimes it would just like they would go and wrestle on weekends. But the women of the golden age had really long careers.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, I guess, especially because like you said, it was just their weight. Like there was nothing, like it was just them out there night after night. And I've heard stories, especially in the old days, where you had to wrestle every night to get paid, and women often, would you find that women would often get nightly gigs, and especially the women of color?
Yeah. In fact, Ethel and her daughter, Shelley, talk about that in the documentary. First of all, Ethel was extremely secretive about her wrestling career. I always say she was like Wonder Woman, like she had this secret identity like Diana Prince and Wonder Woman, because she literally did not tell her children she was a wrestler. So Shelley talks about how she found out her mother was a wrestler by some of her friends were over when she was a kid and they were watching TV, and one of her friends was like, "Isn't that your mom on TV in the wrestling ring?" So that's how Shelley found out her mom was a wrestler, because she said her mom would just go away on trips for a couple weeks at a time, and sometimes she'd come home with her arm in a cast, and she thought maybe her mother was like some kind of traveling, did some kind of work where she was like a traveling business person, and maybe she fell down and hurt her arm or something. And Ethel talks about how she wanted to have a separate life. She had her home life, her family life, but definitely they would be gone for weeks at a time because that's how they were booked. Like you said, they would have to do match after match to make money. And Jeff Lean, in his book about Mildred Burke, he talks about how she would do these back-to-back matches and have to jump in a car late at night and drive herself to the next match before the interstate highway system. So she'd be driving down these dirt roads, and it was rough back then.
Yeah, and even then, I know a lot of the old school wrestlers, they had the kayfabe, and they would not. They were, they refused to break character in any way, and like you could not say wrestling was fake or anything without really pissing people off. Yeah, so. And the way I look at it as, and I can say this being somewhat objective since I'm not like a wrestling fanatic or anything. I look at it as like sort of like choreographed dance. Like you would not tell a ballerina who has practiced and had years of training since she was like, in elementary school, "Oh, you're not a real dancer because you don't get out there and freestyle. You do choreographed routines." So that's how I kind of look at these women. It's like they were highly, highly trained professional athletes. And yes, some of their matches were choreographed and, like you said, the kayfabe where they were playing a storyline or whatever, but it's still very, very grueling physical work that not just anybody could, roll off the back of a, dump truck or whatever and get into the ring. You had to really know what you were doing, or else you wouldn't survive very long. Oh yeah, I mean that I don't really watch it as much anymore, but I have a lot of respect for pro wrestling just for the fact of what they put their bodies through, and there is a beauty to it. There really is. The athleticism to it is amazing. Yeah,
it really is. And Ethel talks about how they learned tumbling and gymnastic techniques before they learned any wrestling holds. They had to learn to be like gymnasts with all the the flipping and the jumping and you had to know how to land and fall without breaking bones. And there's definitely technique to it.
Well, if from going through and kind of doing your research and getting to talk to Ethel and is there anything that you learned about wrestling in general, or what was like maybe the most the most interest. No, I don't want to say the most interesting because it seems like there's a lot of interesting things here. But like, what was something that you walked away with information that you found out that you were just like, wow, I never would have thought that.
Yeah, you know what I really found out, and this was so I finished a cut, like a rough cut of the documentary in 2018, or actually I'm sorry, 2017, and I realized I've never been to a live wrestling match. I was like, I made a whole documentary about wrestling, and I've never actually seen it live. So I went to WrestleCon in Orlando, this big independent wrestling tournament. They had a big women's tournament, and so what I observed. And this was helpful being like sort of like an outsider, not somebody who's so close to it that you can't see things objectively. What I observed is that a lot of the fans in the audience watching this women's tournament were men, and a lot of the women who were there in the audience seemed to be like the wives and girlfriends of the men, and they were kind of sitting there bored. Whereas the men were like, after each match, they were running up to the women wrestlers and taking selfies with them and high-fiving them. And the men were just so passionate and enthusiastic. I even interviewed a couple of the men after the match and was like, you're a man. Why are you interested in women's wrestling beyond, the sex appeal aspect of it? And a lot of the men were like, these women are really, really great wrestlers. They're underrated. So what I found surprising is that a lot of people look down on wrestling as like lowbrow entertainment, and they look at it as quote unquote fake. But I don't know any other sport where the women are the athletes and the fans are mostly men, and the men are very respectful. Now, these wrestling fans would never label themselves as feminists, but they have this mindset of, you can wrestle and you can entertain me and tell a good story. I don't care what gender you are. I just want to see a good match. And I could never imagine a football stadium with female football players and the stands filled with men who were just hooping and hollering and, oh, let me take a selfie with you and let me come up and high five you. I can't imagine any, ladies golf. Would you imagine a whole bunch of men crowded around watching ladies golf and running up to the golfers afterward wanting to take selfies? I can't imagine that.
Yeah, that is definitely something that I can't even imagine. Because I always thought that it was kind of a good mixed bag of men and women enjoying wrestling. But
yeah, I don't mean to downplay it and say that there aren't any women wrestling fans. I'm just saying that I just think it's a sport where the like equal mindset, the men's equal mindset, where they appreciate women, the women athletes. That's something that's not played up very much.
Well, for you, getting into documentary, I mean, you said in print, and then making a documentary. How was that transition? Was there a learning curve that you had to kind of get over?
Yeah, there was a learning curve. I always wanted to be a writer and a filmmaker. I mean, I was one of those kids that's like, at a very, very young age, I knew what I wanted to do. And I debated about going to film school. But actually, my friend Paul Hill, who I went to high school with, he's the full-time editor at the Wexner Center for the Arts at The Ohio State University. They have this program where they bring in filmmakers from all around the country and like give fellowships where they give free post-production. And so I did all the post-production at the Wexner Center for the Arts. And so I talked to Paul like years and years before I started Lady Wrestler about, should I go to film school? Because he went to Wright State and has a film degree. And he was like, you can actually learn more about filmmaking by doing and like by making short films. And he said a lot of the people I went to school with think they're going to be the next Spielberg. And it's just like they're in all this student loan debt when, the technology is constantly changing. And you can basically, it's a skill you can basically teach yourself. So I have an English degree. I have a bachelor's degree in English from Ohio State. But I did kind of learn filmmaking as I went along. Actually, Paul and another filmmaker named April Martin did some of the cinematography. But some of the shoots, I was just a one-man band. I had like a camera and a microphone and was just like, and that's the good thing about documentary is it doesn't take as much, artifice and equipment to basically get your point across with the story you're trying to tell. It's a little simpler storytelling format.
Well, now, when did you start filming versus finish filming?
Yeah, so I actually started filming in 2006, and I on and off for years because I was still working full time as a journalist. I didn't finish film. I finished filming like in 2013. That's actually when I interviewed Rowdy Roddy Piper. It felt like I had enough commentary and stuff to kind of start putting it together. And then the editing, on and off for years. I like did some of it myself on like an editing laptop, and then did the final mix and everything at the Wexner Center in like 2016 and 2018.
So in all of that time, like, and I understand, especially with documentary filmmaking, like how it could take all that time, to tell the story. When in your mind was it, now you knew you were done filming in 2013, you had enough commentary, but even with the editing, when in your mind did you say, all right, this is the story I want to tell and put out?
Yeah. So, I mean, and I have to be clear, if I had sat and worked on it every single day consecutively, like if I had a movie studio backing me, or I had, if I had done crowdfunding, and said, I want to raise $100,000 and, take a sabbatical or from my job as a journalist, or quit and work on this project full time, it only would have taken a couple of years. But because I was doing it and working a day job, and also a couple other projects came along while I was still working on Lady Wrestler. But so what I did was I wrote after I had done all the interviews, I basically sat down and wrote a script, because I was like, I have all these hours and hours and hours of interview footage. I can't just sit here and randomly try to find sound bites. I have to go through the footage and write it into a coherent script. And that's what I did. And so I would say I knew, like in 2016, my first time working at the Wexner Center, that I basically had the framework of a finished documentary, and it's about between 80 and 90 minutes. And I figured that's about the length of a feature film. It doesn't need to be any longer than that. And I felt like, with some tweaks here and there, the basic framework of the documentary was intact, I would say, in 2016. And then you go through the process of applying to film festivals. I actually went to the Cannes Film Festival in 2017. I didn't screen there, but they have this film market where you can network with, sales agents. And so that was great, going to Cannes and getting to see Europe before the world shut down with COVID. So that was a great experience. And getting to I actually stood next to the red carpet and saw Colin Farrell and Jessica Chastain and Adam Sandler, anybody you can, Mary J. Blige, just all these. Likely was there so just seeing all these stars and stuff walking by, okay, someday I'll be on the red carpet myself.
You absolutely will. I mean, the trailer, based on the trailer, I cannot wait to see it. It's just anything interesting, especially in a documentary, I'm all for. Now, is there anything? Are you going to continue into documentaries? Maybe do you have some more plans coming up? Or
well, I actually shot my first narrative feature in the summer of 2019. It's a story called "Things Are Tough All Over," and it was almost like, and I swear to you, I'm not clairvoyant. It's this story about. So it's actually set during the Great Recession of 2008, and it's about this Black family struggling to keep their heads above water. Both the parents get laid off, and their kids were in private school, so they have to take their kids out of school because they don't want to send them to the local public school. So these two parents are home all day long, homeschooling their kids, driving each other crazy. And it was like, oh my God, this is what a lot of people are going through in the pandemic. Now, I've been so busy promoting Lady Wrestler, I haven't been able to finish editing that, but that's the next project that I have in the pipeline. But I've had so many people contact me that have heard about Lady Wrestler, children of wrestlers who they're like, I want to tell my mom's story. She never got her recognition. Just other chapters of the story. There could definitely be a sequel, so to speak, to Lady Wrestler, definitely, because this story has chapters and chapters of. I mean, I'm just barely skimming the surface with these three sisters, Babs, Ethel, and Marva, and also Ramona's story.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to hear more from it. Especially like we said, it's such a long history of how much can come out of it. But yeah, I wish you all the best, and I cannot wait to see this documentary. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. When you have your next project done, we'd love to have you come back, help you promote in any way.
I'd love to come back. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah. The Scene Snobs, we really are big into backing independent filmmakers, especially, if we
That's
can
awesome.
help in any way. So, I mean, I am so looking forward to this. So everybody, this has been my interview with Chris Bournea. His movie Lady Wrestler is going to be out on February 16th. Make sure you check it out. It'll be on Amazon Prime. Will it be anywhere else?
Yeah, it's actually available for streaming on the Lady Wrestler website as well, ladywrestlermovie.com. But if you want to like buy it, and also I'm going to be releasing a DVD as well, because a lot of the audience for this is obviously older people and they like having physical media. I've had so many people like saying, when is the DVD going to be available? Because, they like physical ownership, not let me buy it on Amazon and, and it could disappear if Amazon decides to, reorganize or something someday.
And we will put all of those links right into the description so anybody can check them out. And again, I thank you so much for being on. I would love to have you back on anytime, especially I love talking movies. So if you ever
me too. And I'm a huge movie buff, not just making films, but also watching films. So yeah, I'd love to come back. I appreciate it.
Oh, perfect. So everybody go check out thescenesnobs.com. All of our shows are on there. You can check this interview out, and also on our social media, we will be promoting Lady Wrestlers. So until next time, I want to thank Chris for being on the show, and thank you all for watching. Take care. And that's our show, everybody. Thanks for listening. I am Mick Manhattan, the Scene Snob. We always appreciate you guys tuning in and commenting along and everything else. Go check out this show or any of our other shows on thescenesnobs.com. Thescenesnobs.com. We love you. You guys are awesome. And if you would like, follow and subscribe to our social media. That really helps us go a long way. And please spread the word. Tell your friends. Have them come in. We love feedback and everything else. So everybody, you have a great day. Again, thanks for listening. Thescenesnobs.com. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
It is Ryan here, and I have a question for you. What do you do when you win? Like, are you a fist pumper, a woohooer, a hand clapper, a high fiver? I kind of like the high five, but if you want to hone in on those winning moves, check out Chumba Casino. At ChumbaCasino.com, choose from hundreds of social casino style games for your chance to redeem serious cash prizes. There are new game releases weekly, plus free daily bonuses. So don't wait. Start having the most fun ever at ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.